You're listening to Digging Star Wars, your online journal of the films that inspired George Lucas to create the Star Wars saga. Hello, and welcome into what is episode 11 of Digging Star Wars. Today I'm very excited and proud to introduce our guest, Mike Gleason. Mike is a writer, director, sometimes stand-up comic, his own words. He's a graduate of NYU's film school. And if you want to learn more about Mike, his website is michaelgleason.net. That's michaelgleason.net. And I'll try to post that underneath the posting on our blog. You can also follow him on Twitter at Mikey Gleason. And, I forgot, he won Best Writing for a film he did as part of the 48-hour film festival called MapQuest, which is very, very funny and one of my favorite short films. So I'm very pleased to introduce Mike Gleason.
It's good to be here, Chris. Thank you very much. I can't believe there's been 11 of these, and I'm just getting around to being here. But I'll get over that over the course of the next 20 minutes or so.
Well, I got to save some of the best, not for last, but for the latter. So.
No, definitely excited. I think this is really cool what you're doing.
Great. Well, thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about Nosferatu, and I thought this was an interesting film to pick for October. It's our Halloween episode, if you will. Mike, why don't you tell us why we're watching this film? What's the deal with it?
Okay, well, I was unfamiliar with Nosferatu, but then I watched it twice in two different formats. Nosferatu is a 1922 silent film. It's German. And just, I'm giving you the important stuff up front here. I'm a man of facts. It's German.
It's black and white.
It's actually called Nosferatu, A Symphony of Terror, and then sometimes it's called Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. I should say this about it. Like, I'm a film school kid. Like you said, I went to the prestigious and pretentious NYU Film School. and I grew up watching lots of boring movies, but talking about how great they were. And I respect cinema, and I respect the evolution of the craft, and I can find great things in all kinds of films.
Right.
But I gotta say, this is 80 minutes of silent film that just doesn't hold up as well after years and years. This is pretty boring.
Yeah, it's funny because normally when we have these films, I come on as like the cheerleader, and I'm like, yeah, today we're going to talk about Gone with the Wind and get into it. And I don't want to railroad your presentation here. I'm not a big horror film fan of any era. I've watched some horror movies, but I don't live for it. And I know people right now, they're watching, a horror film a day in October because that's what you do in October.
Sure.
So when I did this, I'm like, you know what, this isn't my cup of tea, but whatever, I'm going to try it and watch this. And I usually love silent films. I'm just enamored with that era. But I agree with you. This was this felt like homework.
Yes, it definitely did. I definitely felt like I was watching something for class. Mm-hmm. Now that said, they did some cool things, and just to give everybody an idea of what the film actually is, it basically is a loose adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Mm-hmm. But they didn't have the money for the rights to Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1922, so they changed the names. They changed a couple things that happened. Instead of Count Dracula, you have Count Orlok, and now you have a movie free from the rights of Bram Stoker.
That's simple.
Until years later when they were sued and then had to turn over all the money and destroy the films. But luckily, some of it made it out.
Oh, really? That's what happened? They made it and then they had to destroy it because of the copyright issue?
Yeah. From what I read online at Wikipedia and other sites I went to, a film company, I believe it's Prana Films. This is the only film they ever made. They made it pretty much illegally, knowing what they were doing.
Right.
And after Bram Stoker's wife, I believe, sued on behalf of her estate. Or his estate, and next thing you know, they had to turn over all the money they made, and then they had to destroy the films. But enough of the film had been distributed across the world that we still have versions now.
That's pretty. I mean, regardless of how you feel about the content of the film, that's pretty impressive. Just the fact that it's 2011 and we're talking about this thing that was supposedly destroyed and has you always hear the performance with the main guys, Max
Schreck.
Thank you. You hear of his performance and how legendary it is, and it could have been wiped off the face of the earth.
Absolutely, and the intention was to wipe it off the face of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So it is remarkable that it survived. When you watch it, it looks like a film that definitely had to fight to survive. It's
Right.
pretty dirty in the two versions I've seen.
Right.
Some interesting score choices in the two different versions I've seen.
Oh, really? Were they drastically different?
They were. The first version I watched was streaming on Netflix, and that version felt like it was like a 1980s techno kind of thing. Now, I saw that there's a version of this, and I didn't get a chance to watch it, that's like sort of made with like, I don't even know what it was called. It was like grunge metal or something
really?
scoring it.
Oh, that's interesting. Did Kronos Quartet do a version too? I thought they did a version too.
It's very possible. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But so that music though was very like Miami Vice, very synth, and that's a version I watched first, and then I watched another version that was all pipe organ,
Right.
which seemed to make more sense.
Right.
However, in that version, on some of the translated placards that show up throughout the film to let you know what's going on, they in some cases referred to Count Orlok as Count Dracula, which is even more illegal than when they originally just changed his name to Count Orlok.
Okay, let's take a break. Listen to music. Hold that thought. We'll be right back.
All of them running about, putting out the stars, extinguishing the sun.
Welcome back. That was an excerpt from the music of Geocentric, and you can see the titles and a link to Geocentric's website posted on the bottom of this episode. But let's get back into Nosferatu. All right. Well, usually when we do these things, I never want to ruin the movie because I want people to watch these movies. So what I've done in the past is I've read the synopsis that comes on a DVD case. So to Mike's point, he's watched two versions of this, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And one of the versions that he watched on DVD, I watched the exact same DVD. It's part of the 50 Movie Pack Horror Classics DVD collection, which we borrowed from a good friend, Phil Congleton.
I got to say, quite a few classics in there never heard of.
Yes.
Just saying.
Yeah. My son and I watched Attack of the Gila Monster 3 times in a row from that collection. So, but here's what the write-up is, just to kind of give you a flavor of what Nosferatu is all about. And if I mispronounce anything, I apologize. Nosferatu. The film begins in the Carpathian Mountains, where real estate agent Hutter has arrived to close a sale with the reclusive Herr Orlok. Despite the feverish warnings of the local peasants, Hutter insists upon completing his journey to Orlok's sinister castle. While enjoying his host's hospitality, Hutter accidentally cuts his finger, whereupon Orlok tips his hand by staring intently at the bloody digit, licking his lips. Hutter catches on that Orlok is no ordinary mortal when he witnesses the vampiric... Is that how you say that? Vampiric?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Vampiric nobleman loading himself into a coffin in preparation for his journey to Bremen. And it stars Max Schreck.
In other words, it's Dracula.
Yeah. Well, what's funny about this is that, yeah, like to your point, it is. But when I read this, I remember, because it's been a while since I've seen this. Like, I don't think I've ever seen this film in its entirety prior to this viewing. And when I read this, I'm like, that sounds like the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Yes, it also sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Which, when you spread that out over 80 minutes, wow, it's
Yeah. I agree.
It doesn't hold up. But you're right. That does sound like just the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Right. What's interesting about this particular version on this DVD is, Phil, who was my guest on Enter the Dragon, when we talked about that movie, he's pretty much my public library when it comes to a lot of these films. I go to him and I'm like, okay, I want to do this. I want to do Nosferatu. Do you have it? He's like, yeah, which version do you want? And then he'll go through the litany of, I have this. And I said to him on purpose, and it's because of my preference when I'm watching silent films, I said, I want the dirtiest, ugliest copy of this movie you have. I want film scratches and hairs. I want it to be 5 different tones. Like, I want it to be amber in one and blue in another. Like, I always want that. And I have to say, this particular version, was pretty filthy and dirty.
Yes.
And I love that because it makes it even scarier, especially when you see the time lapse or time lapse motion stuff they do with passing of day or trickery of the camera. And I know that wigs out certain people. I've actually heard people like, I can't watch those old scary films because it's just freaky how they move. So that I loved, and I didn't plan this, but I thought it was beautiful how I was watching this crappy mass-produced DVD that this company obviously got Public Domain Films to make a buck. I was watching that. And then to compare it, I was watching Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, on Blu-ray.
Yes.
And all its glory and color. And I know that kind of puts Nosferatu at a disadvantage, so to speak, but to me, it was wonderful irony.
Definitely. I should say this, because I feel like I've already sounded very, very critical about Nosferatu, but a lot of effects were pulled off in that movie, in that film, that were way ahead of their time. And there are a lot of in-camera tricks, because everything had to be done in camera, that are really amazing for 1922. A lot of ghosting of images, like you said, a lot of different time warping, some very impressive things. And I think it's kind of fun that we are going to compare it to Revenge of the Sith, which I personally think goes a little overboard with special effects.
Right.
And see how far we've come with special effects over the years.
Yeah, I think it's funny because also we're here, this came out in 1922, so we're 90 years later, about 90 years later from when this film was made, and we're sitting here talking about it. I'm curious 90 years from now what people are going to be saying about The Phantom Menace. Like, really, that film made $400 million?
I'm pretty sure it's going to be accidentally destroyed between now and then.
Yeah, right. It's going to suffer the same fate. There's going to be people trying to eradicate that film off the face of the planet.
Or Lucas is going to remake it slowly into an actual good movie.
Yeah. Okay, all right.
I don't like the prequel, so what can I say?
Yeah, all right. Well, fair enough. Okay, so I feel bad that we treated this classic film, but I want to reiterate what you just said. Watching the special effects gave it a certain value, and I don't know how to put charming's too strong a word, but
yes.
But nonetheless, it has that feeling of like, it's so cool how they figured out how to do that then, and it certainly transports you into the theater seat of the patron watching of that era.
Oh, you had to be blown away by these effects.
Yeah, I mean, when they speed up the horse and carriage in that scene where Hutter's walking and the evil spooky stagecoach comes up and it's real stuttered because of the stop motion. You're like, wow, that's their light speed. Like, that's pretty cool. So I have a list here in front of me of things I felt were parallels between the films. But before I get to mine, I want to know if there's anything you want to talk about first.
Well, I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say. I would say that the thing that stood out to me the most, and this is probably not why people make comparisons between the two films, Revenge of the Sith and Nosferatu, but there is one shot in Nosferatu where Count Orlok rises up from from his coffin. That, first off, a really impressive shot for back then, just the way they sort of, he basically kind of elevates out. He tilts and elevates.
Oh, on the boat.
On the boat,
yes.
out of his coffin. That almost exactly, at least to my recollection, is how when Darth Vader first rises, he comes up into the shot.
Wait, in the office? No, I mean when he's named Darth Vader in the office, or later when he's on the medical table.
On the medical table.
Okay.
Right before he steps out like he's Frankenstein.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just before that, as he
right.
rises up, it's almost exactly the same shot.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Which was like the thing when I watched this that I was like, well, if I had to make any actual comparisons or actual if I was to see a real influence, I would see it in that shot because I feel like that was a direct reference of that shot.
And it's not on my list.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm here for. I'm here for the curveball. Anybody can throw the softball.
Yeah, well, you know what? but that's cool because again, when I do, and I mentioned this in the last episode of the audio blog when I was with Presswood and we were talking about Close Encounters. When I started this project, the first thing, I kind of Googled the hell out of Star Wars and all the related films, and one of my sources was IMDb, the Internet Movie Database. And they used to have a tab, I don't even know if they still have it anymore, where you could look up a film, and they actually had inspirations or something like that. And it would list films, and I think the users of IMDb were contributors. I don't think it was the actual staff of IMDb. So I would look up these, the 6 Star Wars films, and I would see some, and Nosferatu was listed for episode 3. And not having a recent memory of Nosferatu, I sat back and I thought, like, well, what the hell? What is it? Not, and I definitely see what you're saying with that scene. It did not come to mind. The thing that instantly came to mind was the design of Count Orlok, Nosferatu, Dracula, the main character in the silent film we're talking about here, looked a lot like the character whose name is Tiun Mundun. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Basically, he is the alien guy that greets Obi-Wan in that planet with the sinkhole.
Yes.
And he comes up and he's wearing, red and a high collar, and he's got pale skin and
bald head.
Yes, and he has very thin, crooked teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see, I'm going to post his picture alongside Nosferatu's picture when I post this episode up. And even the way he moved was very slow and deliberate. But in episode 3, in the case of Tian, it's almost elegant. He's like a statesman, and that's part of Dracula's character, of course. But it's a little creepier, And what I loved about that design of that character, just to geek out for you in a little bit here, is that when you saw the trailer, you just saw him talking to Obi-Wan and him kind of smile, but it was really kind of more like a snarl revealing of the teeth. And most fans, I would say, I was definitely one of them, that when I saw that shot of him in the trailer, I'm like, oh, who's that bad guy? And as it turns out, Lucas, what he loves to do is put spin on things. You realize he's a good guy during the course of his conversation with Obi-Wan.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about Grievous. They're talking about the droid occupation, and Obi-Wan's giving him instructions. And I thought that was cool, and I really liked the comparison between the two. Did you catch that when you were watching them?
I can definitely see where the costume was influenced.
Mm-hmm.
I'll grant that comparison because it is very, very similar. I don't feel like the character necessarily would be at all.
No, it's just a visual thing.
But as a visual, yes. But I think you can make that argument actually about a lot of the characters throughout the Star Wars universe because there are a lot of high collars.
Yeah.
There are a lot of pointy ears and bald heads and sort of pale skin, and so you see little aspects of Nosferatu in Anakin Skywalker later on, maybe not in Revenge of the Sith, but once his helmet's taken off in Jedi. And you can even see comparisons to Palpatine and Grievous.
I thought Grievous too, yeah.
Who definitely has the high collar and
the pale. He's got armor, but it's to mimic a skull with the things on the side that point up like ears. Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other thing that kind of comes with Nosferatu, with Count Orlok in Nosferatu, is he is sort of there's a parallel drawn between him and the Plague, and he's the Plague coming to town. And I still haven't figured out why Grievous as a robot has a cough, but I thought maybe there was something in there with the fact that he is sort of a plague of sorts. He is an illness and a disease that's coming to town.
Yeah, right. Well, for those wondering why he has a cough, because there's another sidebar story.
I would love to hear it because it can't be logical.
Yeah, no. The way they explained it, the original Clone Wars animated series, the hand-drawn series, that came prior to the current series that's running on Cartoon Network, showed Mace Windu and Grievous, amongst other Jedis, had a battle with him, and it was that particular storyline led right up to the beginning of 3. And when Mace Windu was battling Grievous, it was an intense battle, and as Grievous is up on his ship about to leave, Mace Windu uses a Force crunch and crushes part of his chest armor, which damages his lungs and whatnot. And we are to believe that that is why he's coughing in 3, because he was just wounded in this battle with Windu.
Okay, but my question is, why does he have lungs?
As a robot? Or,
As a robot.
See, he's
a cyborg.
He's basically the prototype of what Vader will become.
Okay.
And he, for those who aren't familiar with Grievous's character, he was a general on a planet, and it was having a civil war, I believe. And the planet's name was Kali, which is an obvious nod to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and all that. And he was a survivor of a shuttle crash. And by survivor, I mean he was saved by Palpatine. There wasn't much left. And Palpatine and his engineers built the suit that you see Grievous in 3. And what was left was his eyes and his, parts of his brain, which you can see through the mask. He has fleshy eyes, and some type of alien's eyes. And the beating heart, which obviously Obi-Wan rips open and winds up shooting, and I guess lungs. So I like Grievous in the fact that I think Grievous is more of a badass villain than even Darth Maul.
Definitely.
Yeah, and the first thing I remember when I first saw 3 in the theater and I saw Grievous, and I know we're getting a little off topic here, I was like, "Oh, why was this guy in 2?"
Yeah.
And there's been novels, expanded universe stuff that explains he was in the catacombs on Geonosis in 2, and in one story he even battles Windu in the catacombs down there. When you see Windu come up into the arena in 2, and he's like, "This party's over." Apparently, he had already kicked Grievous's ass, and Grievous fled, and he was now walking calmly in to take care of Dooku.
Now, when you say that all that happens in an expanded universe, is most of that stuff is all written after the fact? That's
yes.
After.
Well, I think in a lot of cases, it's throwaway ideas from the films. I know, like, if for those of you from the original trilogy fans, there was a book called Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which was huge amongst the uber geeks because it gave you more Star Wars fast prior to Empire. And there was a Kyber crystal in there, and that was the center of the story about this crystal that had force powers. And that was a throwaway element of the original drafts of A New Hope. So, a lot of these ideas are kicked around and they're discarded, and then you don't know what to do with them. If Clone Wars, the animated series now that's going on the Cartoon Network, picks up a lot of that discarded material or, material from like the Ralph McQuarrie concept paintings that didn't make the films. They take them and run with them and put them on another planet. So it's tough because, as a Star Wars fan, I was always trying to read everything and keep up on everything. But the number of books became so overwhelming and a little contradictory as far as storylines. You sort of just shrug and give up. And Lucas said at one press conference, "Oh, the books don't mean anything. You should watch the films." I'm like, wow, another typical George Lucas statement. You have all these fans who are reading everything because they love Star Wars, and you're just dismissing them as, whatever. Artistic masterbation, for lack of a better word. It's just like, oh, whatever, it's fun, but it's not the real thing.
Well, it's a Jedi mind trick.
Yeah.
It's like, these aren't the droids you're looking for.
Right.
It's essentially what he just did.
Yeah. So that's the long story about Grievous.
Okay. My thing then on that, and we can get back on topic after this. If Palpatine can build Grievous, who's a pretty amazing robot / cyborg, whatever, why not build more like that? I think you could win with that. If you make that your stable of guys, you'll be in much better shape than say the clones.
Right. That's a good question.
All right.
That's a very good question. That was music from Geocentric. Thank you very much for lending that music for our episode. Let's get back into it. Let's get back to Nosferatu. That's what we're here to talk about.
Probably should do that.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I go through my list, did you have anything else? Because I want to hear what you've thought, or do you want me to go?
I think you should go.
Okay. I try to put these in some type of order, and there's a good number of them, but we kind of go through and discuss and yay or nay. So I'm watching the film, and I'm looking for something else. I'm always looking for something else when I'm watching these films. And there is a scene in Nosferatu where the main character's wife, Ellen Hutter's the main character, while her husband is away at Orlok's castle, there's a scene where Hutter's wife in the middle of the night is drawn out of her bed, and she's, in a trance-like state. She walks to the balcony, and her arms are reached out, and she's in this trance, and it cuts from her there to Orlok, who is miles away, and he's looking out the window, and they're having this silent communication, great distances apart. There's a scene very similar to this in Revenge of the Sith, and it's when Anakin has been sent back to the Jedi Council after he reveals the news about Palpatine being the Sith Lord. And Mace Windu's like, I'm worried there's conflict in you, Skywalker, go back to the council. So he sits to the council and pouts, which is one thing Hayden Christensen does well in these movies is pout. The thing. Yeah, right. So he's sitting in the council pouting, and then you cut to Padme sitting in their apartment, and there's this really eerie music that John Williams does. It's almost non-John Williams score. It's almost like room tone, or not room tone, like a just audio tone. And she gets up from her couch and she walks to the window, and they're staring at each other. And it's when Anakin's debating what should he do, and they're doing this, and nothing said. And as much as I have issues with 3, I love that. I'm actually getting chills thinking about it now. And I remember talking about 3 with my friends after we initially saw it, and that scene always seemed to come up in conversation, like how awesome that was. Which I think is great because it doesn't have 50 billion spaceships in it.
Absolutely. Which is a whole separate problem I have with Revenge of the Sith,
right,
and a lot of the newer ones, and even like stuff they've done, in the reissues. But that is a good scene. I think it's a good scene though because here's one of the only interactions between Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman where they're not delivering lines, and I say that kind of as a joke. But I'm very serious in that.
Yeah.
The chemistry between the two of them is so non-existent, and it's such a shame because so much is built upon that relationship.
Absolutely.
And a lot of it, the lack of chemistry there makes a lot of things hard to believe. It's hard to believe that Padme wouldn't have the will to go on because,
I know.
Really? Because if you don't really seem to love that guy all that much. And
right.
It just seems kind of sad and angry all the time.
Right.
And then I find it hard to believe that as Anakin is going to turn to the dark side to save her because he loves her so much when I just don't feel any love between the two of them.
Well, okay. I mean, to defend the film, because I can just imagine, people listening to this be like, I thought he liked Star Wars.
I'm sorry.
No, not you, me. Like that's what. But to defend that, that's what Revenge of the Sith. There are moments where it's great that they're finally exploring the themes that needed to be explored earlier in the prequels. The whole, and I know there has to be setup. I get it. I get that you need a preface in a book before you get to chapter 1, and that's what Phantom Menace was. It was the preface,
sure,
a long preface.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that the idea of obsession and how that's going to ruin everything. It's so classical, myth that it's great that it's discussed. One of my favorite conversations in Revenge of the Sith is Anakin in Yoda's quarters and saying, I'm having premonitions. What should I do? And in Yoda speak, he's saying you need to be able to let go of what you fear of losing. It's a great conversation, and it sets up a lot of what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen, But and to that point, the reason I'm bringing all this up is that I understand that the way these two actors were directed does not create a lot of chemistry. And I know they tried hard to push that love button early on in Sith, where they're having that corny conversation on the balcony about, oh, so you love me because of this and you love me because of that, or but it's not with Anakin. It's not about love. It's about you're my wife. I own you, and I'm not going to lose you. And yes, I believe there's love mixed in there, what he feels is love, but he's so screwed up from the beginning of the prequels and of his origin. Everything's done wrong. He's introduced into the Jedi Order way too late. His training's unorthodox. It kind of gets moved up. He gets put on the council, but he's not a master. Everything with him is, well, this is the normal way of doing things, but for you, we messed up. but we're going to do it this way anyway. So it makes sense that, to me, I fully buy, based on what I can extract from the conversations in that film, that he is obsessed with not losing his wife. And I think a huge part of that comes from the death of his mother in 2.
Okay. I'll give you that. Do I think Hayden Christensen did a good job conveying that? No, I do not. If I move past that, structurally, story-wise, I think those are all valid points.
Right.
I just have a hard time getting that off the screen.
Gotcha. Okay, fair enough. I'll go with that. Let's move on because I got other stuff.
All right, sounds good.
Let's not end on a down note.
I don't mean to bash the film because honestly, this is my favorite out of the prequels. I really think some things were awesome, which we'll probably get to. But if this is one of those films that if all I had to do was watch, if I could just see that final scene, the final fight scene that is between Obi-Wan and Anakin, I would sit through Nosferatu just to get to that.
Oh,
you know?
wow.
Like, it's that good of a scene, I think.
Wow. Okay, so another thing I found in comparing these two films was, and some of these are smaller and some of them are bigger. So your job out there is to say, not only you, Mike, but the people listening is be like, it's a little crap. All right, it's like that's your job.
I think I've been doing a good job.
Yes,
That's a
yes,
lot of crap.
yes. But so at any rate, I thought it was interesting how in Nosferatu, Hutter forbids his wife to read the vampire book, the Book of Vampires. Okay, which of course she reads, and we talked a little bit about this before we recorded the episode about that book.
Yes, they read that book very slowly.
Painfully slowly.
It has all the important information you need about vampires, and they never make it past the second page.
Yeah, I agree. They'd be in a better spot. The Star Wars comparison to that in the book is, again, this kind of goes on that whole obsession thing, is Anakin is thinking, well, he says to Padme, after the Jedi temple's ablaze and she doesn't know the full story and all that other business, he's like, I'm going to go take care of this, stay here. He pretty much forbids her to do anything. Mm-hmm. That's what makes her decision to get into the ship with 3PO and fly to Mustafar, I think, personally more compelling because she's disobeying him. You know, because when they greet on Mustafar, he's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, oh, Obi-Wan's the terrible things. And there's all that whole business. And then you see Obi-Wan and it amps up that end battle even more. But I just thought it was interesting that there's both films have scenes with husbands in that traditional male dominance role, like, listen to what I'm saying. And, of course, the wife, for good intentions, disobey their husbands.
Sure. I mean, I think you can definitely say that's there. I think that I don't know that that's a direct draw on Nosferatu. I mean, sure.
It might be more of a coincidence, you think?
Well, I think it's just more of that's a sort of a common theme in a lot of literature. Someone being forbidden not to do something,
right?
Or the man being in control, and then the woman disobeying, or whoever was told not to do something, then doing exactly that.
Right.
But one thing that I always thought was a little odd in Revenge of the Sith is how little Padme does. Now, I realize she's pregnant, but she's such an active character earlier on, from what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
From the first two.
Right. She plans the end battle in one.
Exactly, and now she's just hanging out on the side.
Right.
Kind of.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that goes with the whole silliness of her not having the will to live. Like, she's a very passive character.
All of a sudden,
yeah,
she's a passive character.
Even in the Senate, when Palpatine's announcing the Empire, she's like, oh, so this is how democracy dies, the thunderous applause. I will sit here and do nothing.
Right. I just want to say a really cool line.
Yeah, right.
It's like, I could stand up and fight, but I wouldn't be able to deliver this awesome line. This is how democracy dies.
Now, to be honest, and to educate those who might not be as into Star Wars as whatever, there were scenes in Revenge of the Sith that dealt with a counter group to Palpatine's power. Was it Sith or was it 2? I think it was Sith, where they introduced the characters of Mon Mothma and from Return of the Jedi and other characters, and they were basically getting a petition to take to the Senate to question why the war is still going on and why Palpatine hasn't released supreme powers and all that other business.
Oh, that's interesting.
So yeah, so like, and those scenes were cut. And I love Return of the Jedi, and I like the fact that, oh wow, Mon Mothma was in this scene. Why wasn't in this scene? But I think it's also a very good scene, and it also it gave Padme a little more things to do, but it's not in there. So like you kind of got to stand back and be like, well, we can only judge what's on screen, but it's a part of that. It's something to consider.
Okay.
All right. So that was one thing. And now here's another thing. And some of these are really more visual details than thematic elements. But I don't know if when you were watching Nosferatu, did you feel? I felt they spent a lot of time on those rats.
Yes. And you know what? The second time I watched it, I was like,
what's
wow,
up with the rats?
This is a lot of footage of rats.
Yeah, like they had the rats on the coffins on the ship, the rats in the ship. When they get to port, there's like people stomping the rats. And it was like, okay, I get it. There's rats. But the irony of all this, and it's tied to Star Wars, was I like the scene where Anakin enters, and he's on Mustafar, and he's about to take care of the Trade Federation leaders. Before he enters the room, all cloaked and evil looking, there's the scurry of the mini mouse bots in front of him.
Oh, yes.
That are going, and of course you think of the Death Star and the bigger mouse bots and everything else. But there's a lot of them, and they're scurrying around him. And when I saw the rats around the coffins and stuff, Nosferatu was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, rats are hanging around this corpse of a man, this villain that's, the undead or whatever. And here, when Anakin walks in, when he's made the transformation to the dark side, there are these mechanical mice around him.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I actually was thinking that the rats, at least in Nosferatu, sort of represented the idea of this plague spreading. And if anything, I would look at the rats traveling via the boat and sort of coming on land and everybody being worried about them as the major problem, as being something else in Star Wars. I don't know if that's just the overall feeling of the dark side, of evil spreading,
right,
or even more along the lines of stormtroopers or clones or whatever you want to sort of say is spreading out over the land.
That's interesting.
But I think there's definitely some significance there, as here's this symbol of evil's coming.
Right.
The scurrying of rats or mice would easily be taken from that.
Yeah. All right, good. Well, good. All right, I feel like I'm doing pretty good.
There you go, yeah.
All right.
I agree.
Okay. Another thing I thought was interesting was in Nosferatu, the misinterpretation of the bite marks. I think the write-up on Wikipedia said, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't quite get it when I watched the movie, but
I don't know that I got it, so you better explain it to me.
All right, well, that Hutter, he kind of blows it off like, oh, they're mosquito bites. When he, the first night he's in Orlok's castle, the fact that his vampire sucking the blood out of him, he wakes up the next morning like, oh, look at that, I got 2 bites on my neck.
Oh, yeah.
Where'd they come from? Oh, mosquitoes.
Yes. I won't read past this page in this book about vampires.
Yeah, right.
I'll just say that's mosquitoes.
Oh, I feel a little woozy. I wonder what that's all about. So anyway, but as the film continues, this occurrence happens, and they actually call out, I don't know if it's a placard or it's actually print. Oh, I think it's in the Book of Vampires. Victims find bite marks on their neck, which you need it spelled out to, in this film, and I guess, they felt the audience in that day and age needed it spelled out to them.
Sure.
So I thought that was interesting because there's a conversation in Revenge of the Sith once Obi-Wan and Yoda go back to the Jedi Temple after the massacre, before they know who did it. Yoda says to Obi-Wan, and again, I'm not going to speak in Yoda-ese, but he basically points out to Obi-Wan that the victims lying on the floor, the younglings, were killed by lightsaber wounds, not blaster fire. And, then Obi-Wan's like, who would have done this? So I thought it was interesting that the wounds on the victims in both cases are pointing them to evil. Naturally would be an evil predator that would kill Jedi, but like there's marks left on the body.
Yeah, I think that's 100% in relation to Nosferatu.
Oh wow. Okay.
And I saw it kind of from a different level. Like I think of Count Orlok or Dracula more as Palpatine than I do as Anakin or Darth.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think is happening, sort of like, and this is where maybe it's not Nosferatu, it's actually more Dracula, because in Nosferatu, when Count Orlok bites one of his victims and eventually sucks the blood out of them, he kills them. He doesn't create new vampires.
Right.
Whereas in Dracula, new vampires are created.
Right.
I think what Palpatine is doing is going around bringing people over to the dark side of the Force.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, he's more like Dracula. He gets his teeth of the dark side into people,
sure,
and wins them over. I think that's an interesting comparison. That the teeth marks are very similar to say the lightsaber marks. The only thing with that is, and this is always something that a battle between the light side and the dark side. The light side of the Force kills people with lightsabers as well.
Sure.
Which makes it a little bit more difficult for me to buy that argument, but
well, and that's the point, is that it's Anakin's lightsaber.
Okay, so I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean?
It's like, okay, it's a particular kind of tooth.
Well, no, it's not so much that. It's that, like, yeah, you're right. Like, good, the Jedi's lightsabers, they can kill people too, and that's what's. I mean, one of the great things about Sith is Anakin, from his attack on the Jedi Temple and killing the younglings to his climactic battle with Obi-Wan, is doing it with the iconic lightsaber from A New Hope.
Yes.
And that's what's so cool, is that, like, it is the same lightsaber that Luke Skywalker carried through Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. His dad's lightsaber, his father's lightsaber. And the fact that this weapon did this hideous thing because of the prequels changing the story on us, I thought was like, well, that's a pretty interesting twist. His son, his own kid, will carry this lightsaber that he's using to kill all these kids.
And he has to make all the same decisions,
Right.
I just recently watched Jedi, and by the end of Jedi, Luke is making... I shouldn't say I just recently... I recently rewatched Jedi.
Right,
I don't want to sound like I hadn't seen it.
Right.
Hey, Star Wars, what's that? But by the end of that film, he's making all the same decisions that Anakin had to make. Luke is making all the same decisions that Anakin had to make at the end of Revenge of the Sith, or throughout Revenge of the Sith. Right. And he's just going in a different direction with those decisions.
All right, now I have some more, and these are a little smaller. As you can see, as the list goes on, they get a little more minute as far as the detail. But one thing I thought was cool, and you were talking about special effects of when Nosferatu appears as almost like a ghost-like figure in the film, in the original, and in Nosferatu. I thought it was interesting because that's obviously a special effect and whatnot. And although holograms in the Star Wars movies are in every episode. They are obviously still in this episode. As a matter of fact, in Revenge of the Sith, they hit you over the head with Palpatine's hologram during Order 66.
Mm-hmm.
And the way Palpatine appears in the hologram is, as he does in all the films, is very scary with the hood over and the complete Order 66, the deeper voice and all that other stuff. So
I couldn't help but laugh, but the time I most recently watched that though, because I was thinking how he had to like practice in front of a mirror that hood covered his face enough that when he was telling people orders, they didn't know that he was also Palpatine. Right. Anyway, continue.
But anyway, it's just really the unnerving visual presence of this flickering image to get all filmic on you. I thought that was an interesting comparison between the two of them.
I always thought that the hologram was, in particular in the prequels, that they were kind of stuck with it. Based on how they had done it earlier, but unfortunately later in sequence.
Yes.
And so they were kind of stuck with what seems like a pretty low tech form of communication for all the other stuff that they have in that world and that universe.
Yeah, and it's funny because they kind of play on that in Episode 1 early on when the Trade Federation guys, Nute Gunray and the like, are up in their ship and they communicate with Amidala for the first time we see her in the film. They go to this big circular vid screen. It's very Buck Rogers, and it ripples and she pops up. And I remember sitting in the theater and being like, wow, why wouldn't they use that all the time? Like, it looks awesome. It's like HD, it's great.
Sure.
But I that's the thing. You're retrofitting and reverse engineering everything when you're doing the prequels, and unfortunately, it's something as a fan you're constantly like, oh yeah, Why didn't R2-D2 use those rocket boosters in the original trilogy? You know?
Right.
Oh, there was a warranty on them. They must have run
Yes.
out after 30 years. So, but I thought it was interesting, and again, it was a minor detail. Another thing I thought was interesting, and it does not play a major part, I feel, in any film, but I felt Nosferatu, they're talking an awful lot about those plants. They had the Venus flytrap plants and the guy conducting his class, and
Yes.
and I as a kid who owned Venus flytrap plants, I understand how cool that plant is. I really do. But they must have been so beside themselves in 1922 when they're making this film. Like, dude, this plant closes in.
I got a great idea for a scene. I have this plant.
Yeah, because it's the same thing, man. It's sucking blood, So it was cool, and I thought, like, what? Why is that clicking in my head? And I think there's a scene when they're doing Order 66. There's one Jedi, the blue girl, the hot Jedi. She's on this planet. It's actually a very Star Trek looking planet, but it has these extremely large, exotic looking plants.
Yes.
And you don't see any type of plants that's necessarily eating flies or beings or anything like that, but they're very wild looking plants, and it's purely a gratuitous, hey, look what we can do type of planet, which I think's cool looking. Don't get me wrong. I think it's very cool looking. But it reminded me of that Venus flytrap thing, like, oh, we got a cool plant.
Right.
Let's put it in.
That's actually a very good call, because I feel like Order 66 runs through a bunch of, hey, look at all this cool stuff that we can do.
Yeah.
As they cut from location to location to location. It's funny you mentioned that, because when I watched Nosferatu the second time, I was really just kind of laughing at
I can't
that
believe you
scene.
watched this film twice.
Well, I
in a
should
week,
say,
right, or whatever.
Well, within a couple weeks, I loosely watched it the second time.
Okay.
And it definitely, you could tell, and this is actually a good thing to talk about in regards to Revenge of the Sith. You could tell they were mesmerized by some of the things that they were able to just capture on film. Period. Like the Venus flytrap, which was really cool to put in. Didn't have to be in there.
Right.
There's talk of werewolves at one point, and they happen to have a wolf on film, which I imagine in 1921, when they were actually shooting it, very difficult to get a wolf on film, because cameras were not that mobile.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Timing's everything.
Yeah. So they got it and they put it in. Now it looked like like your average dog, at someone's house. It really wasn't all that impressive, but they still put it in, and I feel like a lot of that happened in Revenge of the Sith. And well, in all the prequels and all the re-releases, there's a lot of, hey, we have the ability to do this. Isn't this cool looking?
Yes.
And a lot of times you can't even deny that it's not cool looking, even if you didn't like it that much.
Sure. Like I said, it's a minor part in both films, but it really kind of kicks over the issues we have with the prequels.
Sure.
But
It's funny too, though, that in 100 years of cinema, you still
are doing that.
You're still doing the, hey, look what we can do.
Yeah.
Because it works. It sells tickets.
Well, and exactly. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what they're doing. They're trying to sell tickets, and that's by no means a fault. That's the origin of the business. Hey, we can make money off of this, technology. All right, so that was interesting. And then I just have two other minor details, but this is something I wanted to mention. You mentioned Palpatine in relation to Nosferatu. I thought it was interesting that in the scene where Mace Windu and Palpatine are fighting, and Palpatine's using the Force lightning, and Mace is right in his face using the lightsaber as a lightning rod that also deflects the energy at him, and it's basically turning Palpatine in closer to what we know him as from the original trilogy. During that scene, and I've seen Revenge of the Sith a good number of times. I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe I've seen it a dozen times. I never noticed that during that scene, there's the music that John Williams constructed. There's a lot of pipe organ in that when he's being transformed into that evil-looking persona that we know. And I know you said that when you were watching we're watching a silent film, we're watching Nosferatu, but one of the soundtracks you had a lot of pipe organ, the same version I watched, that we both watched. And I thought, like, that's definitely a throwback to old horror films. And obviously when horror films had sound, they used the pipe organ a lot. It's cliche, but it's a cliche that conjures up images, and I thought that was interesting that Williams chose that instrument or something that sounded like that instrument for that particular scene.
That's pretty neat. I didn't notice that in the times I watched it, but Something like that is pretty cool if you can do a little bit of a nod to the history of horror. I mean,
Right.
I don't think that's a nod to Nosferatu, but that's a nod to horror films and the classic pipe organ accompaniment that they probably had. That's a nice thing to do in that scene because I think that is actually a pretty good scene. I happen to like that scene somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, well, I like that part of that scene.
Yes, there are issues with that scene.
I do not like the intro to that scene because I think it is so lame that Palpatine takes out Kit Fitzstew and the other dude, like the other guys, lickety split when they walk in that office.
Yeah. I have that problem with the way that pretty much all of the Jedi kind of go down, aside from Yoda, who doesn't, and Obi-Wan.
Right.
Because I feel like if they are truly masters, they should be slightly more aware of their surroundings than they are.
Yeah, I mean, the counter argument is that they were caught off guard. That's the counter argument, and I believe that counter argument for years. I've kind of weakened on my my stance on that, but I understand Palpatine's bad. I get it. You have to make him bad, and I love the battle between him and Yoda, really do. Mm-hmm. And I like the battle between him and Mace Windu too. I mean.
I think that's a pretty cool evolution into becoming the Emperor, as we know him. Yeah,
but the fact that those guys come in and he just stabs one guy, like he's just standing there, and then he nakes out the other guys, and what kills me is that I, not just from doing the blog, but from being me, from people that know me, I get so much grief about Darth Maul's death in Episode 1. I mean, I get so much grief about that. People are like, oh, how come Darth Maul just stands there and Obi-Wan slices him? I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, in Sith, Palpatine takes out 3 guys. They're like cleaning their fingernails as he kills them. They're not doing anything. And I know both scenes are poor as far as that's concerned. And I know both scenes had to be done, so to speak. We got to take out Darth Maul somehow. But when in Sith, like, that really, really bothers me. And it really, like, when it was coming up when I was watching it on Blu-ray, and I was watching on Blu-ray with Peter Fay, who was in our episode about Lawrence Arabia, and he's like, oh, the scene's coming up. And I'm like, the intro to this scene. And he goes, yeah, I know. And it's like, you just kind of like, you accept it. It's just like, yeah, I got to do it. I got to watch this part of the scene to get to the cool part, to get to the battle with Mace and ultimately the battle with Yoda.
Yeah, ultimately, if you're coming into a room to take control of a Sith Lord that you now know is a Sith Lord, you should probably come in just about guns blazing, or what
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not the case for a Jedi, but you need to be prepared.
Yeah,
you don't really need to start out with a statement.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, no, or at least your top men.
Sure.
And that's the thing. There's so much expanded universe stuff around Kit Fitzstew about how awesome he is.
Oh, okay.
And same with Mace, but really with people really responded. Star Wars fans really responded to Kit Fitzstew from his appearance in Attack of the Clones, and there's a lot built up between the 2 and 3 because of the original Clone Wars animated series. That you're like, man, Mace and Kit together. Taking on Palpatine. This is going to be awesome.
Right.
And then, boom, Fitzstew's down. Boom, the other guy's down. Boom, the other guy's down. You're like, what happened?
Well, I think that's a credit, though, to some of the characters that they build up, because you have so many characters in these movies that are considered so powerful that to properly do them justice in their demise would take too long.
Yeah.
You have to keep coming up with amazing new fight scenes and amazing new ways for people to be taken out. I mean, they get lucky in the way that Obi-Wan and Yoda go out eventually. In that they don't really actually have to truly fight so much, even though, I mean, Obi-Wan does, but
right.
But there's not some move that you have to be like, oh, you got caught off guard by that. It's difficult. These are such powerful people that I don't feel like you could play out every fight that needs to play out. Now, they could have come up with some better plan to get rid of them. See, my thing, when I see Mace Windu, I see Samuel L. Jackson. And I think a lot of people who aren't necessarily really, really big Star Wars fans probably come at the film from a similar place, especially around the time that we saw that. So when I see Samuel L. Jackson, he brings with him what my old film professor used to call a lot of intertextual references.
Yes.
He brings with him all the badass that he is in Pulp Fiction,
Mm-hmm.
and And so when he shows up in a scene, he shows up with all that authority. And so it's very important to me, as just a viewer, that he definitely puts up a good fight, which in the end I feel like he did.
Yes.
Now, I got no connection at all to the other guys. So when they get taken out, I'm disappointed, but I'm not as shocked as if they had stabbed Mace Windu first and Samuel L. Jackson dies instantly in that scene. Then I would be much more upset with that scene than I am now.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's yeah. No, that's absolutely right. He does bring a lot, and I agree with what you're saying, and that's kind of what happened to the other characters, is that, the diehard fans had grown attached to him. The thing about Windu, everything, I agree with everything you just said. He brought a lot to the role. He wanted to be part of Star Wars. His presence in the prequels reminded me a lot of Christian Slater's presence in, I think it's, what Star Trek is it? I think one of these Star Trek movies he was in. He was in for like 10 seconds.
Sure.
Because he begged and pleaded to be in it, and I know Samuel Jackson really wanted to be part of it, and it's great. It's great that he's in it. Mace Windu is a great character.
But it throws things off to have someone that famous prior to the role, in that role. It does throw off the dynamics of scenes.
Well, then the argument could be made against Alec Guinness in the original trilogy. I mean, Alec Guinness brought so much prestige and honor, and his film legacy between Lawrence of Arabia and Bridge on the River Kwai and Great Expectations and all the other films he did. He was well established with the parents that were taking their kids to the movie theaters to see Star Wars in 1977.
Sure.
So when he spoke, it was with reverence and authority, and I don't want to say you can't help but like the guy, but you can't help but like the guy.
But you wanted that out of that character, so that's okay.
Right.
Also, at the time, you're trying to, I'm sure they were trying to attach any kind of box office draw they could to their crazy little movie.
Right. All right, well, that's all I got for this, and there's a lot there. And I would encourage our listeners, if you agree or disagree with our comparisons or our opinions of Nosferatu, or even our opinions of Revenge of the Sith, to post them. And you can always post them on the blog, which is diggingstarwars.blogspot.com. We are also on YouTube. I don't see many comments on the YouTube thing, and I'm fine with that, but you have that. If you want to go to YouTube, you can just type in Digging Star Wars, and you'll see the list of what we got going on. And also, we're on Facebook, so just search Digging Star Wars on Facebook, so you can look there. Or you can always email me any comments you have at diggingstarwars@gmail.com. So thank you for listening. And Mike, I want to thank you for your time and for watching this movie and for coming up with your notes and for spending this time doing this recording.
Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. I love that you're making these.
Cool. It's funny because I feel like this particular episode really is off course for what we've done before. So
leave it to me to screw things up.
It keeps it interesting to say the least. And if you want to find out more about what Mike's doing, please check out his website at michaelgleason.net, and I'll try to post that link when I post this episode. He's also on Twitter at Mikey Gleason, and that's MikeYGleason. So once again, Mike, thank you for being here. Special thanks to Geocentric, who supplied the music for this episode. Felt it very fitting for this Halloween episode. And next month, we are going to get to the original trilogy, and we have on deck an examination of the 1948 Western Fort Apache and its connection to A New Hope. So I hope you join us next month. Thanks again.
Digging Star Wars is produced by Mitch Media and has no connection to Lucasfilm Limited whatsoever. Copyrights for films, trademark characters, and related materials discussed in Digging Star Wars remain with their respective owners. For a list of references or source material, please send an email to diggingstarwars@gmail.com.